before. He did win 2 in a row against Prag to make that comeback, Anish. What do you think now?
Yeah, I mean, chances maybe will be slim, but he just has to keep the tension. He has to keep believing, and he has to hope that Magnus Carlsen falls into the same trap that Prag did a couple of days ago of playing passively. And this is a very trendy variation in something very similar. We saw a huge clash last season when Magnus sacrificed his queen against Giri and won a beautiful game. So, yeah, here we see Giri stepping forward with the pawn. He's already castled and rearranged his pieces on the first rank white. Now he's getting ready to step forward in the centre. But this is still quite well-known stuff, I believe.
Yep.
And we will see white gain space in the centre, but black now will strike back. There we go. We see a trade of pawns and locking down the middle of the board. If white steps forward now, we could see something reminiscent of the first game of the day with Anish Giri playing almost a French defence type structure.
Anish, well, he goes for the most natural-looking move, and now Magnus castles the king. And again, Anish has many options. He can develop the knight, as he's done. Another option was just to actually pick up the pawn in front of the king and move it 1 square, just to control the circuit of the knight sitting on g6.
Black is a bit cramped. These 2 pawns are further back than the 2 white pawns in the centre. Therefore, you're cramped, and you should be aiming to exchange pieces. That's the logic. If you have less space, swap off pieces. If you have more space, keep pieces on the board. It's 2 squares are controlled, and Giri does find that move. Not only have you controlled the black knight, but you're getting ready to play the most trendy idea in modern chess. You're getting ready to push Harry the H-pawn forward.
Another idea is actually just to develop the queen.
Now he does it.
And now he does it, yeah.
Yeah, I think he had to before it was too late, before he got steamrolled by the white pawn coming forward. So he had to put pressure on white centre. That's good chess wisdom again. And, OK, after a trade of pawns, I was expecting the black bishop maybe to capture, just to put some pressure on white central pawn. But Magnus says no, he's going to take with the rook. And he might be lining up for something that we call a thematic exchange sacrifice in chess. If white gives enough time, for example, pushes a pawn, then sooner or later, Magnus could consider giving up his rook for a knight. I'm not sure whether you want to rush that now, but it is on the radar. The whole idea is, yes, you've given up a rook for knight, but you win white's central pawn. And long-term, black has 2 pawns in the centre, which could start marching down the board.
All to do with that light square bishop that you mentioned. You know, it's such a bad piece. And Anish, he seems to be in a very direct mood today. And he's like, OK, I'm going to attack the rook. Rook takes a step back. And now we see a trade of bishops. So Anish is just saying, well, I'm going to just make those trades and make sure that those dark squares around the centre are terminally weak for you, Magnus.
So now, if you compare the remaining pieces on the board, white's light squared bishop, good piece, controls a lot of squares, and black's light squared bishop, a bad piece. The nightmare scenario for black here would be to be left in a good knight versus bad bishop scenario, stuck defending its own pawns, unable to get active. And, OK, Magnus dancing around with his knights meanwhile.
Is he in a little bit of trouble in this game, Magnus?
Positionally, strategically, he's in a lot of trouble, but he's active enough for now to compensate for that. So
Magnus's activity is enough to kind of be slightly worse. And this pressure that Magnus has against white's d4 pawn is enough just to tie Anish's rooks down. And Magnus just making an improving move, giving a safe square to the king. Giri, well, he's playing by the textbook, centralising his rook.
The top players in the world. Yeah. Incredible.
It's not as if he's just racking up wins against a bunch of bunnies. He's literally competing against the top rapid players, the top speed players in the world. And so far, he's made it look very simple. I mean, it could have been more even. Magnus has let a few half-point slip here and there by a couple of careless moves.
And Robert Dalton says, shows us one. There's a pawn starting at the bottom of the board. Oh. Ambition.
Yeah. We do love the pawns.
We do definitely like that piece.
Yeah.
He's been thinking the whole time.
Wow.
4-minute think, and I really like this knight retreat, I've got to say, Ivanka, from Anish Giri. Do you think Magnus is feeling the pressure?
Yeah, he's certainly anticipating what Anish is going to be doing next, because that knight has a purpose. You know, it's going to spring over to the f4 pawn and start prodding at some weak pawns there on e6, and also those light squares. And wow, Magnus reacts with that in a very direct way. He says, well, you cannot put your knight there, and I'm prepared to weaken my king. And I think this is quite a sensible choice, actually, because after all, white's pieces are all on the back row, so they're not going to attack the black king that easily. So, wow, I'm impressed.
Yeah, I'm very impressed too. I think Magnus had to choose this because, as you say, if he'd taken a timeout, maybe improved the white queen, then sooner or later the black knight is just going to leap forward, and the white knight, sorry, yeah, and I mean, there's ideas of attacking the queen. This pawn is eternally weak. This outpost in the center, you could plant one knight here. You could maybe later on plant the other knight there as well. Just occupy this square. Now it's more difficult for Anish to kind of find the ideal squares for his pieces. This pawn push does also hint that you can threaten to kick away this knight.
Active measures. It's not the time to be waiting around, and
Okay, he does wait, however, he drops his knight back. This makes a lot of sense long-term, strategically. You want to reroute your knight, but now there's serious pressure against this pawn in the middle. Now, maybe the moment has passed. As soon as the black queen comes forward, and Magnus will put some pressure on this pawn. It does feel like Anish, he's playing it safe, but he's in a must-win situation, remember. And, okay, Magnus doesn't play it safe.
Okay.
Okay, Magnus is the one taking risks suddenly. Instead of bringing the queen to a very nice, defensive and active square, sorry, he pushes this pawn forward, kicking the white knight into the square it wanted to use anyway. And I mentioned that this is tempting for black because you can win white central pawn, but suddenly black's king is very, very open. Suddenly black's pawns start to fall as well. And yeah, I'm worried here for Magnus's king. Knight takes pawn would be a threat. Okay, Anish, it feels like he's been given a second opportunity to get active. And right now, this is the position. I don't think you have time to take this pawn. Simply this pawn and this pawn, these two weaknesses in front of the black king, they're up for grabs immediately. You have to be really careful there.
Especially when Magnus just needs to draw to secure the match. Why play in such a risky fashion? And there you go, he captures the knight. It's just too dangerous to allow the white knight to capture the pawn.
Look at white's queen and rook. They're just staring at a well-fortified pawn, and he does take
He takes a pawn.
It makes no logical sense. The only thing I can justify this pawn capture with is maybe long-term he wants to use his knight on this square, but black's covering that square with his own knight. Look at black's pieces. Suddenly they're pouring forward. This was not possible. Black's bishop is now active, but this was not possible if white had taken with his rook. The black bishop is eternally tied down to the defense of this weak pawn. Anish Giri, he's broken all the traditional rules we talk about there. You mentioned Nimzovich, Shivanka, who wrote a great book, who kind of formed modern positional chess understanding, and he's gone against all of that. Knight takes knight, pawn takes. Yes, he wants to get his knight in, but after this bishop move, he pushed his pawn forward. What is this knight doing? Suddenly, if it moves to either of these two squares, the black bishop, which is the worst piece on the board, would just trade itself off for the white knight happily. And black is left with a nice piece on f5.
Yeah.
And now Magnus is trading off queens. He's going towards the endgame. It's just all gone wrong for Anish. He's just, this is one of the most bemusing, confusing decisions I've ever seen, I must admit. Just in terms of strategy, the top players, they're also good at that part of the game normally.
It just seems to be the Magnus effect. Like, Anish somehow doesn't seem to be just playing in the way that we know that he can play.
And now it jumps up for Magnus.
And it's unsurprising. I mean, just take a look at black's pieces. They've just launched themselves forward. The rook is on its perfect line. I mean, there's like a sacrifice brewing on the f2 square. Oh.
Lightning has struck twice, and Magnus finds the best move. Of course he does. He doesn't even retreat his knight. He doesn't keep it safe. He gives up his knight for the pawn. And the whole idea is if the knight is captured, disaster. Rook takes pawn. Capitulation on the second rank. Breakthrough. And checkmate is coming.
Yeah.
The white bishop alone cannot hold the fort. If the white bishop retreats, the black queen just slides across, and she's going to join her two rooks. And this poor king is just completely cut off on the first rank. Look at black's rooks, the power of them. Let's bring up the analysis board just while Anish ponders whether to resign or not. But I was going to show just the endgame of the last battle between these two. So this was the final position of game 2. If you remember, he resigned here because white's rooks are crashing in on this f7 square. And now let's flick through to the current position. And he's about to resign now because black's rooks are coming in, to crash through on the f2 square. So it's basically the same pattern. Yes, this is more complicated with more pieces on the board, more complicated middle game, but it's the same pattern. It's just the same weakness, just with colours reversed. So Magnus has pinpointed, yeah.
Just resign now. I mean, the problem is, okay, he takes the bishop. but we're fully expecting Magnus to pick up his rook on f8 and capture the pawn on f2 and just ask the question to Anish. What are you going to do about your bishop?
Yeah, and Magnus leaning forward. It looks like he was getting ready to celebrate this victory. Anish down at 30 seconds as well. He throws his knight in the way, but this won't save the day. This knight can be captured by the black rooks. It can even be captured by black's knight, I think.
And there we see the rook capture the knight.
Yeah, this is the safe approach. I was expecting Magnus to go for something a bit more flashy. At least now one of the rooks can be removed from the board, so there won't be that immediate breakthrough against the white king. OK, Anish has kind of tricked Magnus in a small way. That was very clever by Anish to survive, but the problem is you're not surviving for long. Now, rather than the second rank breakthrough, it's going to be the first rank. Black's rook challenging white's rook. You cannot take now. You cannot trade off those rooks because black's queen would swoop down, recapture, and that would end in checkmate on rank 1. So, OK, everything disappears, and at the very end, black's going to be a few pawns up.
Yeah, he's so clinical. He's not giving Anish a single chance. And bearing in mind that Anish is in a must-win situation, he's just put that nail in the coffin.
Yeah, we will see everything get exchanged. The queens are about to disappear. Magnus will emerge 3 pawns ahead. And Anish throws in the towel and resigns.
And shake. 3 wins for Magnus, and it's over. He wins the match. Horrible day for Anish Giri in San Francisco, but Magnus Carlsen is on fire.